Welcome to the GreenPilled.network podcast. If you're just joining us, we are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers using crypto to bring positive-sum digital systems to the world. This podcast features the people who are doing it, and we publish a season of 5 to 10 episodes every couple months. This season is impact season. How can we manifest the meme of impact equals profit? What are the most promising experiments and ideas in impact tracking, and how can we build crypto economic systems that elevate impactful builders? These are the themes of GreenPilled Impact Season 2024. One other special thing we are doing this season is we are allowing you to collect this episode. So if you go to pods.media/greenpill, you can collect this episode on chain. If you want to learn more about the GreenPill Network, you can visit our website at greenpill.network, where you can download the GreenPill book for free, join the Discord, and become a member of your local greenpill.network chapter. Today's episode is with Feems and Disruption Joe from Plurality Labs. Plurality Labs makes understanding and coordinating decentralized grants and governance easier. They conduct discovery, creation, and implementation of processes and policies to help your community build trust. The guests that I have today are Feems and Disruption Joe, who are both working at Plurality Labs. Feems is a DAO governance operator, grant framework specialist, and researcher who has contributed to projects for various protocols, including Arbitrum, Interest Protocol, Aave, and Saddle. She co-founded the DAO Governance Collective, a Telegram group for DAO governance operators, and her work is driven by a mission to create fair avenues for governance participation and equitable grant distribution. Our other guest today is Disruption Joe, who is a leading figure in cryptocurrency, building a pluralist grants framework for the Arbitrum DAO, which has delivered 3 million ARBs in 6 months. Joe is founder of Plurality Labs and head of decentralization at ThriveCoin, where he's been immersed in crypto since 2017. At Gitcoin, he managed the grant operations and FDD, fraud defense and detection workstream, preventing over $3 million in fraud and aiding in the distribution of $50 million of funding. And I am, of course, joined in this episode by Carl Carbone, who is my co-host for Impact Season. I am excited about this episode because I think that Joe and Feems are really onto something when it comes to how to distribute capital, and they're practicing it at Arbitrum DAO. You can tell by the numbers that we're talking about here: $3 million in fraud defense during Joe's time at Gitcoin, and then 3 million ARB in distribution, that this is something that they not only are thinking about, but they're actually practicing. And so I think that this is a fun episode for talking about the plurality of ways that grant making is happening in the ecosystem, but also in the Arbitrum DAO ecosystem. And I think Feems and Joe complement each other really well in this episode. So without further ado, I give you Plurality Labs. Enjoy coordination. All right. Hey, Carl. Hey, Feems. Hey, Joe. How you doing?
Hey, what's going on?
Chilling. Joe, what is Plurality Labs? Why don't you kick us off?
So Plurality Labs is currently serving only Arbitrum, and we are building a best-in-class pluralistic grants framework. The idea of this pluralistic grants framework came from a lot of the work that we did at Gitcoin and thinking about like pluralistic data models and so forth, the DSOC paper and so forth. And the idea is pretty simple. It's really saying instead of having one program that, tries to figure out everything and test one thing at a time, instead use competition, marketplace dynamics, and evolutionary pressures to find what works best, allowing many people to participate and bring their own unique creativity. Since we're only working with Arbitrum, there's not a lot of, hey, what else do you do? We had a few things in our site, but the idea of launching a giant grants program for Arbitrum is actually big enough for us, and we could use another company our size added to us to do this task. So that's where we're at right now. There's 4 of us on the team. We have our second proposal up. We've been in business 6 months. We're just finishing up our first milestone where we delivered 3 million in grants, in our grants, and we're pretty excited to move on to the next steps.
I love how there's a plurality of mechanisms that you're trying out with a single DAO. I'm curious how you selected the mechanisms that you wanted to experiment with. Was that bottom up, or was that something where there was actually a set of things that you wanted to deliberately try and experiment with?
It was both. I see it broken into kind of thirds if you do it by money. It's a little different if you do it by number of programs. If you take a look at Arbitrum's forum and our review of the milestone one, you can just type in review of milestone one. And there's a nice little chart, a little bubble graph showing some of them were chosen more for the experimentation, and some of them were chosen more for the need of Arbitrum to be filled. And so, Arbitrum being very new, and that's one of the first funding opportunities that were available, we needed to address some immediate needs of Arbitrum. So one program called Firestarter started up where we were giving funds to the one person to cat hoard or move along really necessary immediate need problems. Most of the other programs were split between ones that came through an open application process and ones where we reached out, used professional discretion and our experience of the space to say, this is really cool. So for example, Joke Race, like we all know that's cool, but has it gotten the iterative opportunities to learn? Like I was with Gitcoin for many rounds, and every round we learned something. So I wanted to see some other tools that, we in the DAO space all knew were probably really cool. There's something to them, but they really haven't gotten that like shot of having iterative cycles of real funds flowing.
What was great about Gitcoin is that there was a round, and every round there'd be one or two variables that we change, but there'd be effectively the same structure, set up a project, set up a voters every time you went back in. So as you think about configuring these different experiments, what are you hoping to learn? If things are working well, how do you want to carry that forward?
Yeah, there's two ways that I think about this, and we need to distinguish some of these levels of how we think about it. There's a grantee who's funded from a grant program that they apply to. In our program for Milestone 1, we had 12 programs. And we don't use the term program at that level. We call it a framework. So there's a framework in which programs can apply and participate. And our framework helps solve problems at the framework level, like how do we review grants, as Feems does, across all of them in equal ways, right? And they have like equal viewpoints to them. How do we create dispute and appeal systems that are available in a governance that, each one you wouldn't want to have that bureaucracy like redundant? How do you make sure that a grant that applies in one round doesn't apply for the same work in another program and they don't know about it? It's okay if it's explicitly known, right? But like they got to know. So there's these problems that come up when you try to create a pluralist framework that aren't there when you're just doing one program. So when I think about it, I think about us, our job at the milestone level is to look at the programs, to coach them in terms of, hey, you could have done tighter cycles with $300,000 instead of doing one program. You could have done one at 100,000, one at 200,000, right? You had this dispute issue. It could have been better solved through our governance doing X. We then also, use the model of the grant impact measurement or grantee success measurement, and we need to separate those things. Most grant programs don't. They're looking for impact, and impact's generally hard to find because it's relative to what you said you were going to do or set out to do or to what somebody else did, but it's relative to something. But what's not that relative is, did the grantee do what they say they were going to do, right? So at each of these levels, there's opportunities for refinement. Our coaching to the program should be doubling down the amount we're putting through programs that are great and cutting programs that really weren't that great. The one thing that I think is like a caveat where you might be less than maximally successful as a operator of a framework is cutting out programs after one try. Because anybody who's been a founder and tried to start something, like that first time you try something, most of the time it sucks, even if you think it was great. Like a lot of times it feels like a failure. Sometimes it feels great that you got something done, but you look back and you're like, we did everything wrong. But you need that first step for like people with that entrepreneurial spirit who are going to go and like create a new mechanism, right? Because we're talking about building new mechanisms and using them in different ways in our side. And like the reason that we have to do this is because the DAO has one decision-making modality. if they want to try any other decision-making modality, it has to be approved through that first modality, right? So it's a very slow process to experiment and find new, unique ways of allocating value in your community. So me coming from Gitcoin, I'm saying we got Allo protocol and we can experiment with as many different ways of allocating funds as there are unique ideas in our community that we can support to be built and run some funds through and find out if they're good and go forward. So if you think about those different levels, there's the grantees want to do their best and they want to communicate it great to the community. The programs want to learn how to tighten their cycles and double down on the grantees and their winners, or how to connect to other grant programs that complement them. So like quadratic funding is great for sourcing grants. Direct delegated domain authority is great for doubling down on them. So we might connect a round manager from the direct domain authority to quadratic funding to source a bunch of grants that then they can watch 3 months later, they can double down into. And at the framework level, we're thinking, okay, we have to coach these, we have to watch in between them, we have to remove redundancies, we have to build governance frameworks, and we have to put it all on chain and remove ourselves from it. So as we build up and we think about these iterations, in our plan with Arbitrum, what we see is, we built a pluralist grants framework. I'd like to say it's best in class, but it's kind of the only in class at this point. Then this next milestone is all about scaling that, right? And putting it on chain. So this is kind of like milestone 1, we had our kid and put them on the bike and we're like, let's start wheeling around and we're holding them and kind of it's off. It's not really them. Milestone 2, we want to get to the point where the training wheels are on and we're watching them, right? And in milestone 3, well, once they ride successfully with the training wheels, we're not just going to be like, okay, good luck. We're going to stand there a few times and be like, we're here to catch you if you fall, but this is you riding and you have no training wheels, right? So that's kind of the progression that we're going to do. And at each level, we hope to be able to coach the different levels and help them, produce better. So by that, we can walk away, and a pluralist framework is a thing that other communities can adopt.
Just to add to that, we're also doing that kind of staggered approach when it comes to impact evaluation and reviews. So the current ones that we're running are not questions like, did this project have an impact? It's more about, did this project align with the objectives of the program? What is your sentiment on whether or not we should fund programs like this? Because I think when we look at impact evaluation, we look at it from a program or funder's perspective. But what we're also trying to kind of showcase is a grantee experience and a grantee's grant journey.
There are a couple of quotes that I connect to that. I always talk to people about, I was talking to a great dev shop scope list, and they were like, when we go to get a grant from a DAO, it's the same amount of administrative work for us to get 25K in grants as it is to get $500,000 in client work. And that sticks with me. So the grantee experience in it, it's like, how do you get top talent when top talent has to be like, first they're put up for like actual like personal attacks when they go to the forum and reputational attacks. They have to be a diplomat, a salesman, a creative. They have to be up for like a month and a half to 4 months of no pay without knowing if there's going to be pay at the end of it. And you want to get top talent like that? Like, we definitely need to improve the grantee experience all the way through.
Yeah, I'm into that. It's kind of like a snake chasing its own tail, because you're going to a grant or to a DAO for a grant in order to improve grants so that the next person doesn't have to do all that political bullshit, right?
Yeah.
The same.
Yeah. Carl, you want to take the next question?
Yeah, I was just going to dive in a little bit on what Feems was saying about trying to measure impact and improve the grantee experience. So obviously, as you're getting grants to be onboarded for the first time, at the same time, they're getting exposure to different mechanisms. What are some of the ways you're trying to connect them, make the experience more seamless, and ultimately get better at tracking them?
So I think from our point of view, we, as Joe said, that like milestone 1 was about experimentation. But then the next step is that how do we learn from that experimentation so that we can better address the needs of grantees in order for them to succeed in milestone 2, which is like incubation, before milestone 3, which is release. And so I think that the way that we're looking at it is first is by asking these particular questions, we're able to actually see the consistencies of the objectives between different grants. But rather than having different grant programs compete with one another, the one that we are actually applying using Karma Gap is actually categorized by categories of like things like tools, education, community. So then that way we can actually develop some sort of assessment frameworks based on those particular categories, rather than having programs who are already working in silos to then compete with one another. So I think that also in Web3, not only from a grantee's perspective, but a grantee like ours as well, a lot of programs could feel like by collaborating, then they might be limiting the opportunities for them to get funding as well. However, in DAOs and using Arbitrum DAO, it's already so new that we really need to understand what is the alignment of the priorities of the community and where do we have the funding gaps that prevent us from growing.
Just being one of the participants and recipients of one of the early grants, I have to say that you've done a really commendable job trying to find collaboration opportunities between different grantees. And I almost feel like every day waking up and there's another Telegram group, but just trying to connect different grantees together and make sure that they learn from each other. So I think that's really awesome.
Same, if not overwhelming.
It's a little overwhelming, but it's overwhelming in a good way.
Hopefully you get to pick and choose and there's opportunities for you to find.
A plurality of opportunities, pun intended.
Feems, you were mentioning that there is a role of getting the community to buy in to the grant making that you're doing. And I think the sense out there is that Arbitrum is very decentralized as far as DAOs go. And so there can be a pretty public process of getting buy-in for any new idea or thing that you try. I'm guessing you might have some battle scars from participating, or at least seeing others do that. So any advice in trying to get a community to believe in and give buy-in for a grants program or some kind of new idea?
Well, I think that in regards to the community buy-in for grants idea, I would kind of push that to Joe, because a lot of great people come to him and say like, oh, I have this really great idea. I'm not really sure where it fits in. In terms of the community review, yes, of course, there is incredible buy-in that I needed for the community, but then it's also like, what kind of information can you set them up so that there is an incentive for them to continue? So I think that if I approach the Karma Gap review process with blank sheets and just told grantees just to fill it in without any guidance or without any information, then of course nobody would fill it in. And actually, prior to releasing this, I've actually talked to grantees and programs running in the DAO as well as delegates to get their sentiment about this so that I can actually plan ahead. So I think that for anything is having those early conversations before you release anything, release an idea, to understand what type of information or incentives would drive community members to buy into your project initiative, or in my case, decentralized review.
Yeah, anything you want to add to that, Joe? I know that you have some battle stories of your own.
Oh man, I have plenty, but most of them are like the inevitable like flow of like the current in DAOs. Like one of the things you want to do is like find where you're with the current, and as hard-headed or stubborn as somebody with a great idea can be, because sometimes it's like pretty good idea, like you have unique experience and insight, and you want to push it through. I think a lot of it is being like user-centered, focused, like experienced. Feems has a master's and has worked with governments doing public-private partnerships. It really understands like the intricacies of this. Mary on our team, she worked doing like change management consulting, specifically around user-centered design and design thinking. They both care and they're passionate. Sean as well. And I think that's what you actually need is the people will give people like others the time to speak and express what they want. I have one story that I really like from our grant program, which kind of shows two aspects of it. There was a guy named Gavin who was brought over to me because they were like, hey, he runs Arbitrum grants, and like you're thinking about building on optimism. Maybe you should talk to him and see if there's an opportunity. And I asked him a little bit about his company. It's called Sidechain. And this was a few months ago, 3 months ago. And this last week, Arbitrum is being used on New York City's Winter Jazz Festival, where, thousands, 50, 100,000 people will be getting an NFT using sidechain. They're not even going to know it because its user experience is so awesome. But it's out there because of this grant. Now, this grant was given by the Arbitrum Foundation, not one of the Plurality programs. Now, why did that happen? It's because people always say, if you're interested in a grant in the Arbitrum Foundation, go talk to Joe. And that's because there's a lot of people who have stories about, yeah, I was successful. So whether it was like, Carl, with like yours, where it's like, I actually went and found you because I saw you were building something and knew it was amazing and wanted to bring it in. There's some things where there was a huge problem, like Camelot put this liquidity incentive proposal. It didn't go down. GMX said, we have the votes to pass something. None of the little guys will get fed, but we're willing to wait a reasonable amount of time, not too long. So we were like, we can give a grant to somebody to shepherd this process and facilitate the idea of what could we pass in 1 month if we could move something. And then there's these other times where people just bring people. And any of these times, I'm making the space and taking those calls, right? And giving them a half hour time and learning what it's about. And we're going to direct them whichever direction they need to go. But I think being user-centered and putting yourself in the position of those grantees and program managers and the delegates that you're talking to is trying to figure out what's reasonable rather than telling them about how right we are is probably the hardest thing to do, especially for me and my personality and other people who have like creative ideas. Like we're always telling people about great ideas that we have, and when they work out, we were contrarians then, so why shouldn't we be a contrarian now, right? But finding that ebb and flow where you can be with the current is really, really powerful for making those inroads.
That's a great point. I'm curious what y'all are excited about with it when it comes to impact attestations and impact evaluations. I know that that's a theme that we've been focused on in this season of Greenpill. Maybe Feems, this question to you. What are you excited about when it comes to impact evaluations and attestations?
I'm really excited about, of course, the program or the projects that we had funded, but individually, they're really great. But when they can work together, it's like a real system that we can build for impact evaluation. An example would be like the Karma Gap, for example, has an integration with OSO, as well as what Mickey and Burns are building in terms of a data dashboard. And so when we're looking at impact evaluation, we actually should be looking at the complete user journey of the grantee. So what does the application process look like? What is the database in which the application process is actually approved? And then from that, how does it go into a user interface like Karma Gap, for example, in which grantees can fill out their particular milestones, their project information and updates and so forth. And then what are the validating tools that we can use to validate some of those decentralized reviews? Because if we just have open-ended questions, we're not really going to get any answers. And it's also not going to be able to provide grantees with a fair scale in order to measure their project. And so I think that what I'm really excited about in terms of impact evaluation is the way that the projects that we had funded are able to really integrate with one another, but we're also, creating a plan in which we can build a system for that actually to be fair, equitable, and also data that we can pull from so that we can learn from and reiterate. So for me, impact evaluation should be like, especially for longer term projects, should be like a business plan. It should always be a living document in which it continuously gets reviewed.
One of the things I think is really cool about what you're doing and what you described there with Karma is that they're also using Ethereum attestation service to log both the profile of the project and the updates that are made and new milestones. And so not only is that putting the information on chain so that anybody can go in and look at it and explore the metadata, it also makes it very easy for projects like Open Source Observer to find artifacts that product is submitting. It could be a GitHub repo. It could be contracts that they put on chain. It could just be the wallet they're using to receive funds. And so with very little friction, we're actually able to go and identify those types of artifacts about the project and make it so you can surface new insights about the project to users.
Absolutely. Yeah, some of that open data being on chain is like a lot of what I'm excited about. More of it available for the community to shepherd with. There's also like like two components of it that like what we're doing with the impact evaluation that I think are pretty novel and like exciting. One of them is that if you want to pay people to review grants, you run into this problem, or to do anything, where you eventually are paying for more noise and less signal. People, for example, if you say, we'll pay you to put in a joke race submission, 9 out of 10 will put in Shepard, great. And that's not a great like review or submission or answer. What we realize is there's all these auto validations on chain, and they're great for giving you a binary, did this happen or did it not, but they're not great for reviewing quality or giving like a range output of like how well it was done. Humans are great at that. So, one of the things we're using is like the Thrive protocol behind Thrivecoin with human validation, where any of the entries, we can say, we'll pay you to come and participate. If you hold ARB, you're eligible, you get past the gating, and then you can review a grant, anybody in the community, right? So we don't propagate power to a web of trust, which embeds some circle of influence, or to token holders, which the people with the most circle of influence. We put the accountability and spread it all the way to the edges. And we couldn't do this before because if you paid people to review, you'd get that noise. So what we say is we're not going to reward you until you're validated by the human validation protocol, where we have other people rewarding. And we use a lot of that research from Gitcoin, where we were doing participatory reviews for both civil and grant evaluations. We had come up with some math proofs that some people, Octopus from like token engineering and Joe Cook from the Ethereum Foundation helped us with, built out simulations. And this is a continuation of that great work at Gitcoin, where with those proofs, we know that we can actually pay people to participate. And some of the other work, Vitalik wrote about in 2016, but it kind of got popularized at Google in 2019, peer prediction mechanics. If you ask people, what do you think your peers will answer this objective question? And then if by asking in that way, you can scale the amount that you pay rewards, and it doesn't change your expected outcomes. So between these two mechanism design components, we're able to spread the accountability across the edges of the Arbitrum network, and we aren't then susceptible to the circles of influence that form in the way that a web of trust would, or the network propagation of like token holder power does. It's something completely different and unique. And we get the side benefit of a memory or reputation of who routinely is willing to put in the effort in reviewing.
I hope we're at the point where we can actually start turning some of these things into ways that make the grant application process seamless, and maybe even invisible for grantees. I mean, honestly, I would love to see a world where someone could say, if you participated in 3 different Gitcoin rounds and you've been able to build a certain reputation and you've been able to get, say, recurring donations from certain members of the community, then you are auto-qualified to participate in some kind of a larger round. All the data is there. I think we could just stand these things up. It's a question of when we're going to start seeing that happening.
I love that idea. Like building some type of memory for people or reputation. That was the other thing that Scopeless followed the 25K to 500K comment with. They're like, now we hit the 25K. We do great work, hoping that we come back. And either the DAO has changed people who have the authority to do whatever, so they don't want to use our work anymore, or it's the same people and there's no memory for them to say, okay, now they get 50K because they did a good job, right? So there wasn't like that lasting component that we could build upon. Totally agree.
Just to add to that, like, I also think that like what we've been discussing as well is that like, how much should we invest in terms of like experimentation? Same thing with like STEP and the Step Back Fund, right? So if larger protocols and smaller protocols are competing for a larger pool, there's a higher expectations. But what about for like smaller projects? There's really no like period in which you'd say it's like, okay, we accept you, unless it's like such a small amount that it also doesn't cover their operations. So I think that when we're looking at kind of grantees, grant journey, we could also look at grant programs funding journey, right? And so it's not necessarily like, yes, they might have 5 million, but then we could also release like 1 million to smaller projects with these particular lower expectations, because we understand there's an experimentation or a newness, right? And then from there, like you said, Carl, is that if they're successful, then it could unlock, the opportunities for them to get great, like bigger grants. And so I think that also could be something that could be applied, in which grant programs would create more of a phased approach for grantees' user journey. If we're looking at our grantees as a long-term investment rather than a short-term in which they would just be shopping around ecosystems for grants.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the pathway? Like, so many times, if they build infrastructure, who's out there marketing that infrastructure and telling, the 500 protocols building on Arbitrum, now you have this opportunity and it's going to make your life easier, right? If you're taking a product market fit shot bet and you give some, entrepreneurs some funds to start building, well, did you give him a pathway to investment? Are you choosing to give grants to things where you have VC partners ready to invest in that if somebody can nail down the 3 or 4 things they need to be investable, right? Do those VC partners have corporate partners or enterprise partners on the other side who are directing, hey, we're buyers of this product if it gets there, right? So like building the pathway, whether they're public good infrastructure or a private good, product market fit bet, whatever way you're stimulating your ecosystem with grant funding, is there a pathway, or do you just give them some money and say good luck?
So just a time check. We're getting towards the end of the episode. I think we got to land the plane in the next 10 minutes. I'd love to start zooming out towards the bigger picture. Maybe Carl, you want to ask one last question, and then I'll start asking some closing questions.
One question that comes to mind is that we have a lot of mechanisms that are pretty good at doing a egalitarian or peanut butter spread across a bunch of projects. So you're able to get money funding within a certain range, but people complain oftentimes that there isn't enough to do something super, super ambitious. Where are we able to place moonshot bets that could have incredibly massive upside? Are there any things that you're thinking about or experimenting with where you see potential to actually power some moonshots?
Absolutely. Our milestone 2 request, we had put 3 things as outcome of our 3 milestone progression. Those were, when we walk away, when we put ourselves out of a job delivering this, it will have been that we delivered capture-resistant governance for the grants program. That was a main goal. That was a passion thing that was driving me. But also we saw optimism to delivering $100 million last week. Even 6 months ago, we knew they were way ahead. Polygon delivered like $200 million the year before. We knew that Arbitrum needs to scale, right? So we said, we're going to massively scale the amount you can safely allocate, right? Not stupidly allocate, but like safely. And then third, that means that we need to create systems that use like evolutionary pressures to double down on winners and cut losers. That's both at the grant level within programs. We want to find programs that are better at doing that. And then we want to double down on those programs at the framework level. And then we want to find systems where the input of the community identifies those winners and losers in a way that's similar to a control group of experts or the most informed delegates. So a lot of the community review stuff that Feems is running, if we can community review just the grants in terms of, did the grantee do the job and was the grant successful and have impact? Those are 2 different things, usually aren't considered 2 different things, but they are. Then you can also then do other things like automating milestone payouts on the pre-processing of the grant. You can have one place for an application, and then you can have a fair routing system where it routes to the program that's best for it to fund. And in this milestone 2, we're saying, hey, we were able to come up with all these experiments because you gave us a license to an open decision-making modality, and you're trusting our professional discretion to experiment in that space. And anything that we're doing, we're not ratifying to the whole DAO, but we are making available. And so I think great decentralized governance is where the systems work well enough that people are opting into it. It's like the race that encourages people to run as fast as they can, not the one that encourages them to knock down their neighbors, right? And if we can build a governance system like that, that will be great because it's evolutionary. Well, big shots come from delegates like the people at Arbitrum saying, yeah, I understand that we're in the decision-making modality right here. We need some other decisions to be made, and we're not sure who else should have that trust. And so it's a matter of how quickly do we get there to, should we allocate 2x what we did last time? Should we allocate 5x? 100x? I don't know what the right answer, and I think it's up to the Arbitrum community to decide. They're going through that process right now. But the bigger amount that they are willing to put into an allocation fund for us or for another group that comes by and has great ideas. Hopefully, if we got a large allocation, we would be identifying 2 or 3 amazing other groups and spinning them out such that they could interoperate with our governance, but we're directly funded by the DAO in the future. Yeah, I think that's how we get big bets, is people understanding that we need more than one decision-making modality to be successful.
So a plurality of decision-making modalities.
Exactly. We got some labs trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I'm going to keep saying the word plurality until I can pronounce it on the first try.
One more thing, actually, just going into the plurality meme. Do you see a world where there's a plurality of funders that are funding projects that are building in the Arbitrum ecosystem?
Yeah. I see a world where, let's say, years from today, where we back off having built the framework, but we're competing in the mechanism that we built. Maybe Feems breaks off and does a work stream where she's competing to be the best impact evaluator, and she's finding out like, hey, here's how we have a community-driven impact index that can work not only so that, like she was explaining earlier, that programs can work together, but actually Optimism and Arbitrum can work together and have, the competitive drive that they give to each other and in positive sum outcomes for Ethereum, because we're all scaling Ethereum.
All right, I'm going to move towards my favorite wrap-up question, which is, in a world in which you're maximally successful, what does that look like? And Feems, will go to you first.
It looks like that we have a plurality of projects and people coming from different walks of life actually participating. It also looks like equitable pathways for funding and checks and balances of those distributions of funds.
Joe, same question to you.
Yeah, I'd say that it's I want to see the barriers, the friction, gatekeeping of how to access work completely annihilated, right? Like, you can show up and it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, where you're from, what your background is, what degree you have, whatever. There's some amount of work you can do to prove yourself, and you can get paid for the value you create consistently, right? And you can get the shot to double down, triple down, whatever the next levels are. And the only thing stopping people from, being able to use their potential is their will to do so. Right? And hopefully in that world, when some of us lose the will to do so, there's enough other people who are ready to back them up that we don't have that problem anymore. That's a good world to me.
Thanks. Carl, anything to add as we start to move into wrapping up?
I think that was a great note to end on. We want a plurality of builders that are contributing in all sorts of different ways to a flourishing ecosystem.
Okay. And at ETH Denver, we're going to play the plurality drinking game where you have to take a shot every time Joe says plurality.
You take a drink of your beer when somebody says it. You take a shot when they say it right.
Okay. All right. Well, Feems and Joe, thank you so much for your contributions to the ecosystem. Glad to finally have you on GreenPill, and see you all at ETH Denver.
Thank you both so much. All your contributions have been amazing. Thanks for having us.
You just heard from Feems and Disruption Joe of Plurality Labs. I'm excited about the work that they're doing because they are distributing so much capital in the Arbitrum ecosystem, and they're clearly thinking about it in a new and unique way. I think that they're pioneering in a lot of ways the different ways that grants could be effectively deployed in DAOs of the size of Arbitrum. Thank you again for listening to the GreenPilled Network podcast. Again, we are featuring the people who are building a coordination, a network society of thousands of hackers, dreamers, and doers focused on using crypto to bring positive sum digital systems to the world, like my co-host Carl Carbone, like Disruption Joe and Feems. If you value our work, you can collect this episode at pods.media/greenpill And please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. Gratify us with likes and sharing this episode. That is the source of all our powers, and that is how we build this movement for pro-social Web3 and how we build this coordination, at least until we rewrite our social media algorithms for the better. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review, and I will see you on the next one. Peace and love.